Okay, so today's topic is all about basically what's inside a plant. Okay, and we're going to put this all into just one big set of notes. Like I said, long topic, I'm sorry. But this really correlates with your project. So if you're going to do this project where I ask you to make slides in a PowerPoint presentation all about what's inside a plant, you're more or less regurgitating today's lesson. Okay. So I want to begin with the basics of, well, what makes up our stuff. And this first slide kind of mentions it. If you have groups of cells doing the same thing, we call it a tissue. For example, if you have a whole bunch of brain cells together, it makes up brain tissue. Right? And tissues that do the same thing form an organ. And a whole bunch of organs form a system. So these are the words I need you to know. Cells make a tissue makes an organ makes a system. Is that kind of intuitive? You guys kind of knew that about the human body probably? Okay. That's our goal today, is to talk. And by the end of today's lesson, hopefully you will know about specific plant cells, specific plant tissues, organs, and systems. Okay. Now the first bolded word I need you guys to know, other than I guess these four right here, so I know these four really aren't all bolded necessarily, but you should know them all, is the word meristems. Okay. In animals have something called centrioles. Do you guys recall the word centrioles from animal cells? What does a centriole do? Centriole causes cell division. Specifically, either meiosis or mitosis. This is where a cell literally splits in pieces. Well, this is what an animal cell has. Animals have centrioles in their cells that allow those cells to basically clone themselves and make two of them. Right? We call that mitosis. Well, plants don't have centrioles, so they have something different. They have something called meristems. Okay? And meristems are the areas in plants that allow them to grow. Which kind of makes sense, because how else does a plant grow? But it works a little bit differently. These meristems are growth areas, and they really just produce one of two types of tissue. We're going to focus on just these two. It's either roots or shoots. Those are the two sides. Now in humans, there's lots of different systems. We've already talked about your nervous system, your respiratory system, your circulatory system. There's your excretory system. There's your digestive system. Right? There's lots of systems. We're focusing on two. Now, without looking further ahead, anyone want to take a guess as to where the roots are located? Where are roots located? Underground. So this isn't a huge leap, but if the roots are underground, where do we think the shoots are? There we go. That's how we're basically labeling the plant. It's basically either below ground or above ground. Those are our two systems, underground and above ground. Right? Because we kind of all know this, don't we, that all plants they need to go in the dirt. Right? But they don't just stay buried in the dirt. Eventually they grow above. Right? So now I don't think I have this necessarily directly in slides, so why don't we discuss some of the organs then that you might see in a plant? Anyone want to take a guess as to some of the organs a plant might have? Even let's look at this picture right here. What sort of organs would there be? Leaves, yeah, right? This leaf right here is an organ. What else? You say trunk? Yeah. Yeah, like a tree trunk or a stem or something like that. Like this little piece right here. Let's call this a stem. That would be another type of organ. Yeah. What about this thing up here? What do you call those? Yeah, like a flower or like a petal, maybe, right? These are actually sexual organs for plants, by the way. You might have learned this in grade 9. There are things called the stamen and pistil, yeah, ovule. You guys are learning those at one point? So this is literally how plants reproduce, is through their reproductive organs of like flowers and petals. Okay. There's one more I was going to mention. Oh, imagine you had an apple tree. Well, the apples would also be kind of like an organ in a way, right? It's an organ that falls off, right? But let's say that it's a fruit-bearing tree. The fruit would be another type of organ, right? Where it's accumulating something in that fruit. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later today. Actually, no, let's talk about it right now. What do plants make? Okay, that'll work. I didn't phrase that very well. What do plants use sunlight and carbon dioxide to make? Glucose, sugars, right? Now, sometimes those sugars, they're used in the leaves and in the organs and in the roots and stuff like that. But in a fruit-bearing plant, sometimes those sugars end up in strawberries, apples. Does that make sense? Right? And so sometimes we actually end up having fruit as part of the plant. Right? There's also, don't forget, roots themselves are also considered to be an organ as well. Right? I mean, it's kind of an entire system, and I'm really simplifying things. But how is it different than, like, your nervous system is mostly your brain and nerves, and then there's brain tissue, and there's brain cells, right? So I know I'm going to use the word roots a lot today, but really there's root systems, there's root tissue, there's root organs. So roots are another example of an organ in a plant. Now what I've got here is a picture then of a cross-section of specifically a leaf. So just so this is clear, this is a single leaf. Now normally when you think of a leaf, I draw it, I'm not a good artist, but I draw it something like this. This is a leaf maybe. And maybe I draw like, I don't know, like a line down the middle and it kind of looks like this. I don't know whether that's a really bad leaf or not, but like a leaf is really flat, right? So this is meant to be like the really, really thin, oh, I'm going to spell this right here. Thin section of a leaf, where this is the top of the leaf and this is the bottom of a leaf. And what I want to do over the next couple of slides is discuss the different tissues inside of a leaf. Again, what is a leaf? A leaf is an organ. But inside of this organ, there's many different types of tissues. Okay? There's not just one type of tissue. Okay? We've got on the top something called a cuticle. Anyone ever like touched a plant that's like really waxy on the top, but like on the bottom it's not? That cuticle is a very wax-like component on the very, very top. And one of the key characteristics of it is it is transparent. What does transparent mean? Yeah, transparent. Why does the top of the leaf absolutely have to be transparent? What needs to get through it? Sunlight. Yeah. Well, at the very, very top of the plant, right below the cuticle, are some of these surface cells. Okay? And in these surface cells, they are packed with chloroplast, which kind of makes sense because don't we want to have chloroplasts at the top? Because what do chloroplasts do? They allow for photosynthesis. So these cells up here at the top, they're packed with chloroplasts. Okay. That is called the palisade. Palisade tissue. Palisade tissue is the very, very top. And its main function, basically, is to do photosynthesis. But that's not the only tissue that you find in an organ of a leaf. So you have the transparent waxy coating on the top. You have all of these cells at the top here, rigidly aligned. You'll notice that they're all really tightly compacted, almost like solar panels, all right next to each other. But down below it down here, can you guys see how there's like a gap right here? There's a gap right here and a gap right here. This is different tissue. It's called spongy tissue. And spongy tissue is kind of just like a sponge. It's got holes in it. It's got gaps in it. Now this might beg the question, well, why would a plant need to have some cells that are tightly compacted to each other and have other cells that there's gaps in the middle of it? What else do you need for photosynthesis? You need light, but what else do you need? Water, and what's the third ingredient? Carbon dioxide, yeah. Well, carbon dioxide can't get in through the top, because what's getting in through the top of the plant? Light. So carbon dioxide has to come in through the bottom of the plant, through these little gaps right here. See, there's a little hole right here? It's called a stomata. Okay. And a stomata is actually a type of cell. I've got slides on this in future, like further on in my presentation. But there's these special cells called stomata that let air in. Specifically, carbon dioxide. You have to let the carbon dioxide in, but it can't come in through the top. Because what is jam-packing the top? The palisade tissue, whose job is to do photosynthesis through having all these chloroplasts there. So sunlight comes in this way. Carbon dioxide has to come in through the bottom, hence the spongy tissue. There has to be like holes for the carbon dioxide to fit through because it needs to get up to here again. Make sense? Kin, you mentioned the last ingredient to photosynthesis. What's the one we haven't mentioned yet? You said it earlier. No, the other one other than carbon dioxide. Water. Yeah, that's the last one. We also need water to get to the cells as well. And that requires a third type of tissue. It's this thing right here. Okay, it's like a vein, right? And you know how I drew the leaf up here, where I kind of drew it with like these little like lines through the middle of it, right? If that makes sense to you, that right there, those are the veins of the plant. Just like as humans, I can see like the arteries and veins in my hands. Plants have a circulatory system. Only the circulatory system carries two things. Our circulatory system carries blood, right? But the circulatory system of a plant carries two things. It carries water, and to do that, water goes through this thing called xylem. And so xylem is basically like these veins or arteries that comes from the roots. And it's like tubing. This tubing allows the water to eventually make it up to here, so that now you have sun, you also have carbon dioxide, and finally water makes it here. And now finally photosynthesis can take place in the leaf. So we call the xylem, I'm running out of room here, it's called vascular tissue. I'll write it down here. Vascular tissue. And vascular tissue is kind of like our circulatory system. Only I mentioned it carries two things. It carries water up. But what gets made in photosynthesis? Sugar. And oxygen, by the way. Now, oxygen's pretty easy. Oxygen will just go right back out the way it came. Remember how you have that spongy tissue? So oxygen can just go right back out the way it came. That's not a problem. But let's say you make some sugars right here. Okay. Well, sugars get made in the leaves. But remember how I mentioned how we have like fruit, like strawberries or apples, that are made of a lot of sugars? That sugar needs to then move somewhere else. And so that's what this is called. It's called phloem. And it's also vascular tissue, only it carries sugar. So one of these things carries water up, and the other one carries sugar back around the plant, most specifically to anywhere where you want the sugar to accumulate. Okay. So that's part of the vascular system. Very similar to how we have arteries and veins. You know how we have arteries that carry blood, Our arteries carry blood away from the heart, and veins carry blood back to the heart. It's very similar here. Xylem is kind of going this way, and xylem is going to the leaf. Phloem is coming back out of the leaf, and it carries sugar back with you. So that is a quick overview of a lot of the different tissues that we have. I'm now going to spend a little more time in detail talking about each of them like one at a time. So that's kind of the basics. Does anybody have any questions so far? If I could give some advice, maybe not right this second, but at some point, add these to like your definitions list. Because today there's a lot of different words I gave you. Cuticle and chloroplast and palisade and spongy and vast, like there's a lot of words today. So let's begin talking about a little bit more tissue here. I've already used some of these words before, but the word I want to use that overall covers more is the word dermal tissue. We actually use this word with humans as well. Humans, if you go to a dermatologist, what does a dermatologist specialize in? Skin, yeah. So humans, what is the most outside layer of our bodies? Skin. While plants have an outside-most layer as well. So we call that the dermal tissue, or maybe even heard the word epidermis. It's the outer layer of all herbaceous plants. And by that I mean the non-wooded plants. Okay. If I mean non-wooded plants, I mean things that don't have no, if I say no bark on them. Does that help? Because there are some trees that have bark around the outside of it. That's a little different here. Okay, we're talking about like just a generic plant that like your mom is growing in the backyard, right? A strawberry plant. Okay. And so this tissue is always 1 cell thick. That's it, 1 cell thick. And it's also responsible for getting gas into and out of the plant. Now, I want to go back a second to my picture, and I'm going to erase all the stuff I drew on this picture because I kind of need to get rid of all the mess here. But in this picture right here, there's actually dermal tissue in 2 spots. And I didn't mention it at the time, but now's a good time to come back to it. Right up here at the top, this right here would be dermal tissue, because it is literally the outside coating right at the top here. But where else does this same color of cells show up? Down here at the bottom, right? Because the dermal tissue really needs to go around both sides of it, except there's one difference. The top of the plant has the cuticle on top, has that waxy coating. I want to spend a few minutes talking about that on this next slide right here. Okay. The cells and the leaves of the stem have this cuticle, and here's the reason why we have it. It helps to resist attack from microorganisms, like bacteria. It's basically just like our skin is. The top of the plant is most likely where gravity is going to cause things to fall. And we do not want those germs and bacteria to get into the top of the plant, and so it has like an extra barrier there. In my mind, I think of like, you know how you can use like cellophane, like saran wrap, to like wrap up some sort of food? That's what I think of. Really thin, really flexible, and it also does one more thing. It also protects against bacteria. It also prevents water loss from the plant. Okay. Plants don't want to lose water. There's really only one place that we want, well, okay, I'm lying right now. But as of right now, there's only one place we want our water to be, in the xylem. And if that water could somehow evaporate through the top of the plant would eventually shrivel up and die because it would have no water left. And so this waxy cushion right here, it keeps water from basically escaping. It also, in this example right here, is actually keeping water from necessarily getting in, by the way. Where does the water get into a plant? By the roots, yeah. So when you water a plant, if there is water on the top of the leaves like this, it's functionally useless because the water can't get past that little waxy coating. Can you guys even kind of see how there's like a wax kind of on the top there? So that's the cuticle. The second type of tissue I need you to know is called ground tissue. And the ground tissue is like the middle section. So when I was discussing a few slides back here, these cells right here, which were called palisade cells, and these cells right here, which were called spongy cells, that's the middle section. So the word is ground tissue, and it's the majority of the plant. Okay, it's everything that's more than 1 cell deep, and it does things like it provides strength and support for the plant, and it's even in the roots. Okay. It is also where the photosynthesis occurs. And if you can kind of imagine like a cross-section picture here, you're going to have dermal tissue on the very, very outside edge, and then the inside part of it is going to be the ground tissue. Okay. It's either tightly compacted or it's very, very loose, one of the two. One of the reasons why I love showing you guys the Magic School Bus episode we're going to do on Friday is it actually does a really good job of showing the kids going through a plant, and they do an accurate representation of it, where for a while they can easily walk around and move through the spongy tissue, like this tissue right here. The kids have no problem moving through this. And then they get to the top of the plant, and all of a sudden they can't go anymore because it's all like they're all like right in a row. Very efficient right here. So anyways, that was ground tissue. The last type of tissue we're going to discuss is vascular. And again, this is all about transportation. Okay. If we were using the human body analogy, this is your circulatory system. It's what causes the 2 things that you need most to move. It allows them to move. Water and sugars. Right? We need to get water from the roots up to the leaves. And then once the leaves make sugar, well, we need to get rid of it, right? I mean, how is that different than like a manufacturing facility where you bring in raw goods, you make furniture out of it, and then you got to send the furniture off to stores, right? You have to ship it out again, right? So the 2 words I need you to know are xylem and phloem. And if you haven't started to memorize which one is which, xylem involves water and phloem involves sugar. I have a dumb dumb way of knowing which one is which, but maybe it'll help you. Xylem and water, X and W, are both at the end of the alphabet, basically next to each other. That's how I remember which one is which. And phloem and sugar, QRS. I know they're right not next to each other, but like that's how I remember it. So it's dumb. All right, does that make sense so far? Okay. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about where these cells come from. Okay, specifically in the vascular tissue. What they have is they have cylindrical cells. We've drawn pictures of cells before that maybe look like a bit of a box. We've also drawn cells that look maybe like a sphere. These cells are very, very specifically, they look like a cylinder. And the reason why they need to look like a cylinder is they have to function like a straw. Because they're tubing, right? We need to make a tube out of it. And so what you basically get is a whole bunch of cylinders on top of each other. A cylinder on top of a cylinder on top of a cylinder. And I've got a photo of this later in the notes, so I'm going to skip forward and find you the photo real quick. Because it's actually a ways away. Here is a good picture of maybe what these cells look like. Here's a cylinder. Here's another cylinder. Here's another cylinder. Here's another cylinder. Or maybe here's a better picture of it. See how like right here, you've kind of got like a tube, and then you've got another tube. Okay, that is what the cells look like. Basically, they're very cylindrical, as opposed to like ball-shaped or square-shaped. Why? Well, they have to look like a long straw. There's actually one more thing that's really important about these. These cylindrical cells, and by the way, right here, I'm still talking about xylem. This little paragraph right here is on xylem, which is for water. What actually ends up happening is the cytoplasm eventually becomes broken down, and these are actually dead cells. The xylem cells are dead. Why would they need to be dead? Well, if you get rid of, you have an idea? Or you're just scratching your head? Does anybody know why the xylem cells need to be dead? More room. Water is super critical for a plant, right? Plants need water to live. And so we need to get water through these cells to the whole plant. And so if you have a cell, and inside the cell you have cytoplasm, and a nucleus, and all the other things that come inside of a cell, there's no room inside of there for storage. So these cells actually die, and everything in the middle of the cell goes away, except for the outside. What's the outside of a cell in a plant called? The cell wall, yeah. And so what you're left with is the walls attached to each other like a long straw. The analogy I like to give kids is my children, they make crafts out of like the most abstract materials, like say toilet paper rolls. You guys know how like you get an empty toilet paper roll, it's a little piece of cardboard at the end there, right? Imagine that you had a whole bunch of toilet paper rolls, you just stack them on top of each other, right? That's basically what xylem looks like, a whole bunch of those in a roll. But they have to be empty in the middle so that water can get sucked up through them, right? If there's cytoplasm in the middle of it, if there's a nucleus in the middle of it, well then there's not as much room, basically. Does that make sense? Okay. Phloem then is very similar as well, but it transports your sugars, okay? And it actually is still alive, and we call it a sieve tube cell. Sorry that it's kind of crossed out there. But the phloem goes through what's called a sieve tube cell. But it has the same problem. The cell doesn't have enough room for the sugar to go through it. Not efficiently, at least, right? Because how would you bring sugar into and out of a cell? You'd have to like do endo and exocytosis. You would need to constantly using vacuoles. You'd have to have the Golgi apparatus being activated. It's very inefficient. So what ends up happening is these guys lose their nuclei. It's actually brilliant. What they do is they take the nucleus out of the cell, which right off the bat, you're probably thinking, well, how does the cell do anything then? Well, it actually works together with something called a companion cell. And so there's actually a second cell just outside of it, and that cell has the nucleus. So basically, rather than the nucleus being inside of the cell, the one cell take the nucleus out of and put a small little cell next to it, and that cell is the brains behind the operation. I have another dumb analogy of this. You guys ever watch like a Scooby-Doo cartoon, and there's like two henchmen, and like one of the henchmen, the classic analogy is like he's a big burly guy, but like he's dumb as rocks, right? And like the big henchman, like he always needs to like take his orders from probably like the small little guy, right? And the small little guy is the brains behind the operation. You guys know like the stereotype I'm talking about in like a a classic kind of cartoon thing there. That's kind of what it's like here for the phloem. The phloem has sieve tube cells which are massive, but they have no brains because we need to get rid of the nucleus for there to be room for sugar to go into. But the companion cells go next to them. So again, I'm going to find a picture of these guys. This is what phloem looks like. Big, long tubes right here called sieve tube cells. And they're dead. No brains. More room. And then there's little bitty cells next to it. And these cells right here, they do have a nucleus. And these guys tell this guy what to do. So basically the little guy bosses the big guy around. Does that make sense? So that is our vascular tissue then. That's what I've got for slides on this one here. The vascular tissue is either the xylem, which is completely dead, nothing inside of it whatsoever, basically one big long straw. The phloem has the sugars inside of it. It looks like these tubes right here, but there's nothing inside. We're hollowing it out. We're getting rid of the nucleus because the cell that tells it what to do is next to it. Yeah. They were once living, yeah. They were at one point living. It's just they've since died. Yeah. Oh, there's a word on here that for some reason I always forget. We call the xylem cells tracheids. 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 That is the word we describe each of these long cylindrical cells that is dead. Yeah, at one point they were living, obviously, right? But as the plant grows and grows and grows and makes a new cell, eventually, like the inside has to fall out, right? Maybe this isn't the greatest example, but imagine you have to dig a tunnel, right? As I dig the tunnel, I literally have to like dig dirt out of the ground and like get rid of it, right? And I think as the new cells grow, the newest cell is alive, right? But then the insides of that cell have to get sucked out. And then you can make a new cell. It's alive. Suck its contents out. Make a new cell. It's alive. Suck its contents out. Just like when you're digging like a tunnel, you'd have to keep like filtering all the dirt out of the thing. So, this is a long lesson. You guys want to take a quick little break here? Is that okay? Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Come back at 10:15, and I'll keep going from here. Because it is a lot of me talking at you, and I'm sorry. That's just kind of the way this one is. So 5 minutes. Did I not print you one? Oh, we want to work on it together here. Okay. Yeah, for sure. Here, let me just take my microphone off so that it's not recording this.
That's the only card you don't have to pick up.
Okay, why don't we get going again here, because I've got a whole bunch more to cover still. Like I said, sorry, today's a long lesson. However, I am talking about an entire plant system, organ, tissue, and cell, so it's a lot. So with that kind of as a summary, why don't I move on to this slide right here. And for those of you who maybe need to draw a picture of this at some point in an assignment or on a lab activity, I think this is the slide that if I were you, I would try to copy this out if you need to draw a diagram of a leaf. Okay? Because it looks like this. Cuticles on top. What's the point of the cuticle again? Protection. From germs, organisms, microorganisms, right? So that when gravity kind of pulls them down as they're flying, like, achoo, I sneeze, right? And, you know, all the germs are flying in the air. The top layer is covered, right? That makes sense. It's also see-through, so light can get through. The top right up here is the epidermis, dermal tissue. And it's also at the very, very bottom as well. And its goal is basically just to be the outside layer. Also see-through, by the way. Because then after that, you have the palisade cells. And these palisade, or mesophilic, that's another word you might come across, mesophilic. These cells right here are packed with chloroplasts. Chloroplasts. Main goal, photosynthesis. Intake, carbon dioxide, water, and light. Output, oxygen and sugar. Well, then below that, you've got the spongy tissue. Why is it so spongy? Because air has to get through it, both directions. You need CO2 coming in, you need oxygen coming out. Okay, so there has to be a lot of gaps in it. And then in here are these like tubes of xylem and phloem, which we just finished talking about. Xylem, dead, like a straw, carries water in it. Phloem, also kind of dead. Its brain is just on the outside to save space, so that way you can put more sugar inside of it. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is where we're going to go next, actually, is these cells down here at the bottom. They're called guard cells. And like the word describes, guard, they're meant to be a protection so that only certain things can go inside and out of the cell. Remember how the top had that cuticle, which was protection? Well, if the top is protected by the cuticle, and this thing is really thin, there's really only one other way in, through the bottom. And that's what guard cells do. So in my next few slides, I want to talk about guard cells, but I think I've got to do a few more pictures till I get there. Yeah, here's another picture of the exact same thing, but I think I'm repeating myself a lot, so I'm going to move on. Here we go. Here's where guard cells comes in. There are some very specialized plant cells. Right? Just like in the human body, we have specialized cells. We have brain cells. We have heart cells. We have liver cells. And brain cells would really suck at doing tasks that livers are supposed to do, right? And heart cells would really suck at doing cells, right? Like they have one job, and it's a very, very specific job they're supposed to do. These guys right here, these guard cells, are always on the lower epidermis. Okay? And their goal is basically to protect against who comes into the plant. What sort of things need to come into the plant? Carbon dioxide, yeah. But if there are things that we don't want coming into the plant, then these guard cells, they need to close. They need to like protect the plant, kind of like a, maybe like a drawbridge in a castle. That's what these guard cells do. Let me find you a picture of them right here. I'm kind of going out of order, but since I'm talking about guard cells, here is a picture of guard cells. Okay. It's actually plural. It's guard cells. There's always two of them. Okay. The guard cells look like this. When they're open, they're kind of kidney shaped. And right through the middle of it, there's a gap. And things can fit through the gap. Okay. However, when they're not open, rather than being kidney shaped, they're more like ovals. And now you can see that there's really no gap for anything to go through. So the word we use is stomata. A stomata is when you have two guard cells. And the stomata, oops, stop drawing. Undo that here. The stomata is like the hole that you get in the opening. So basically, here's the idea. You have these two cells that normally are just flat next to each other like this. But they have the ability to like bend a little bit and cause an opening. And in order to bend and cause an opening, they need to swell up with pressure. You can see that the word right here is swollen. They swell up with pressure. Well, what are they going to swell up with? Water. If there is lots of water in these cells, it means the plant has plenty of water, which means these cells open up and they say it's time to eat, and it lets in the carbon dioxide. But let's say that there's really no water nearby. Let's say that you're like my wife, who's really not good at gardening, and she forgets to water the plants all the time. She does not have a green thumb. She has a brown thumb. And so you forget to water your plants. And they're dying. They're shriveling up. There's no water. Well, what ends up happening is if there is no water, as a self-defense mechanism, these cells, they shrink back up. You guys remember the idea of hypo and hypertonic? Okay. These are cells where all of the water right here is leaving these cells because there hardly is any water, right? And if there is no water in these cells, the water leaves them and they close up. And it protects the plant. Basically, the plant bunkers down and it tries to hide itself and protect itself from anything getting in. Does that make sense? Because remember, this is the only way into the plant. But let's say there's lots of water. Let's say the plant has been watered regularly, the soil is moist, damp, and there's plenty of water inside the plant, right? Well, all of a sudden, water then can come inside of these cells, and they swell up. Not to the point where they burst, but they bend a little bit. And that bending lets air in. And now you have the ingredients you need, right? You have the sun, hopefully. You have water, and as soon as there's enough water, now the air can come inside as well. Does that make sense? Okay. Oh, it's on the slide here. You guys should know this. The word we use to describe this, turgor pressure. So if there is enough water in the plant, but the plant says, okay, time to feed. Because really that's what it's doing, right? If there's enough water in the plant to allow for photosynthesis, turgor pressure causes these things to open up. Where was I? I got a little off topic here. Yeah, let's go to this one right here. The next slide I want to talk about is chloroplasts. Where do we find the chloroplasts? In where? Nope, because the nucleus is a different type of organelle. What types of cells have chloroplasts? You guys remember? Palisade tissue cells have chloroplasts. Okay, so let me go back in the pictures again here. These guys right here are jam-packed with chloroplasts. That's actually why the leaf looks green, is that there are so many chloroplasts in those cells that chloroplasts are green. And the reason why is it has this pigment called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the chemical that basically is the last ingredient. Okay, you know how I mentioned that you need to have sunlight? You need to have carbon dioxide, you need to have water. The little lie there is that you also have to have chlorophyll. Okay? But the good news is that this plant has lots of it, and these chloroplasts generate the chlorophyll. So it's actually 4 things you need in this equation. You need to have H2O, CO2, light, and chlorophyll. Okay. Now, these 2 things right here, these are things that, like, we as humans, like if we're trying to make a plant grow, we probably need to water it. Or if we're not watering it, the plant has, remember that self-defense mechanism, where if there isn't enough water in the plant, it hunkers down and it hibernates. It shrinks up the guard cells and it goes into like lockdown mode, right? Until it finally rains again, and then it says, okay, finally, now I can open back up again. That makes sense? Okay. Chlorophyll and light, and then it makes your sugars and oxygen. So here is the equation, by the way. I need you guys to know this equation from a chemistry point of view. We've already done chemistry in this unit, so this shouldn't hopefully be like too challenging to remember, but this is water, this is carbon dioxide. This molecule here then is probably the new one to you. This is glucose, C6H12O6, that's glucose. If you ever need to balance it for some reason, it's actually a really easy one to balance. It always requires 6, 6, 6, and 1. Which is kind of ominous that the numbers are all 6s there, but anyways. So that's the equation for photosynthesis. Okay, so one more time, where does it take place? It takes place in these cells right here. They're palisade cells, and they are part of what we call the ground tissue. Remember, the top layer up here, this layer right here, that was your dermal tissue, right? So it's one layer below that. This kind of just has a picture of what's hopefully going on in kind of like a zoomed in look. But basically what I wanted you guys to see, if you can tell it all here, is that the chloroplasts are just jam-packed with that chlorophyll. Well, that's their one job, do photosynthesis. Okay. So much so that you can actually see movement of chloroplasts inside cells. Okay. It's actually one of the reasons why we believe that cytoplasm is kind of like a jelly. Remember how when we talked about a cell, inside the cell there's a nucleus and ribosomes and chloroplasts and lysosomes and all that stuff inside there, and the jelly is the cytoplasm that keeps them together? We actually believe that all those little organelles, they can actually move around a little bit. And one of the reasons why is that chloroplasts, we can actually see them moving. Okay? They actually do a wonderful job of this on the Magic School Bus, but let me try to draw a picture of this for now. Imagine that this is a chloroplast right here, and it's up at the top of the cell. At the top of the cell, what is it likely to be able to get? I'm not phrasing this well. At the top of the cell, it's probably going to get the most amount of light, right? Because when you're at the top of the cell, you're going to get the most amount of light, right? Whereas if you're at the bottom of the cell, what sort of stuff came in through the bottom of things? Water, and probably a carbon dioxide. So what we believe happens is that within the cell, these organelles, they run through a loop. They go like this. They actually go in like a circuit where they stream around in a circle. And so at the bottom, it picks up carbon dioxide and water. Then these organelles, they go to the top of the cell, and then they pick up light. And as soon as the light hits them, they make sugar. And then they come back down again to the bottom, and they keep going in a circle. So pick up the H2O and CO2 at the bottom. This is inside of a cell, by the way, right? Inside of one cell. These organelles then go up to the top, make the sugar, come back down to the bottom, deposit the sugar into the phloem, and they keep going around. And so we call this cytoplasmic streaming, where the stuff inside of the cell can actually move around. Now, I imagine the nucleus and the mitochondria, they probably don't move a whole lot, but the chloroplasts, they can. I like this word here, fueling. Because really, when it makes this glucose, that is the fuel the plant uses to feed itself. I already talked about this slide right here, so hopefully I can move on this slide here. There's a word on this slide. Well, actually, there's a couple of things I need you to know on this slide here. Can I go back and talk for a bit about the stomata opening? Okay. I need you guys to know how the stomata opens, by the way. Remember that, again, the idea of hyper and hypotonic? How in one case water rushes into the cell, and in one case water rushes out of the cell? Okay. We need to talk about why that occurs, and it's this bullet point right here. When light strikes the leaf, the guard cells start to accumulate potassium by active transport. Because isn't light a form of energy? And so active transport causes these guard cells right here. Let's use the closed ones right here. It causes these closed ones right here to bring in potassium. So I'm going to put a whole bunch of K's inside here. Well, all of a sudden then, there's a lot of potassium inside the cell, and there's not a lot of potassium outside of the cell. This is now a cell in a hypotonic solution because there's not a whole lot of potassium outside of the cell anymore. And what happens is water will now try to come into the cell. This is water now. Water will now try to come into the cell and cause the potassium, because there's so much potassium inside, it'll cause water to also join it. And that's how it opens up. So hopefully that makes sense to you there, but that's the mechanism here, is that first, potassium comes in through active transport. We force potassium into the cell. That then makes a hypotonic solution, and then water follows it naturally by diffusion. Or by osmosis, actually, because technically it's water. Right? One more word I need you guys to know here is the word transpiration. Okay. Transpiration is basically the evaporation of water. And this is, again, one of the reasons why leaves have those stomata. It's why they have like this lockdown mechanism. Remember how this right here, there's an opening? The opening is very specifically because we want carbon dioxide to come in and oxygen to leave. But sometimes water will evaporate. And if the plant loses its water, that can be a bad thing, right? Because then the plant has no more water left. So transpiration is the word we use for when water evaporates out of a plant, specifically through the stomata. Most of the time we want to avoid that, because if a plant is running low on water, we don't want to lose more of it. That makes sense? The last word that I've got on this slide right here is the word lenticels. And almost everything that I've been talking about was for plants that don't have like bark around the outside of them. And I've kind of been ignoring like your typical tree trunk plants for the last little while. Well, these are the exact same things on those plants, only these are in the bark of them. And you've probably seen this before if you've looked closely at trees. Like I've seen this in the trees at like Nicholas Sharon Park before. These sorts of things on a plant. You guys ever seen these before? Those are lenticels. Lenticels. Okay? And basically they're like stomata, only they're not on the leaves, they're on like the wood part of like a tree, right? And these are basically two cells in the exact same way. They almost look like lips maybe, right? Where there's a top lip and a bottom lip, right? And maybe my mouth is the exact same analogy. Right now, right? Because nothing can come through, right? But if the stomata are open, things can go in and out, right? So that's the idea right here. These are called lenticels. Okay, last couple topics, and I can wrap up our lesson. There may be a natural question that then arises. How does water move through the plant then? Because where does the water go into the plant? Through the roots. But somehow the water has to get from the roots up to the top of the plant. How does it do that? Especially if the cells are dead. Right? Remember, the trachid cells, the ones that contain the xylem, those are dead cells. How do you get water up a straw? How do you get water up a straw? You suck it up. Well, that's actually where transpiration comes in. Okay? Transpiration is the evaporative process that causes water to evaporate. But water has a really cool property called cohesion. Cohesion. If you haven't heard this word before, cohesion means that it sticks to itself. You know how like water sticks together in like a droplet format a little bit, right? Like if you have like a faucet that's like leaking and the water kind of sticks together in a drop, water has a polar principle to it that causes it to stick together. And so what ends up happening is if water is evaporating out of the plant, one molecule pulls the next one, which pulls the next one, which pulls the next one. My daughters have things called like a barrel of monkeys. You ever seen those before? Where there's like a monkey that has like an arm that hooks this way, then there's the monkey, and then there's an arm that hooks this way, and then you can cause another one to hook onto it and go this way, another one to hook that way. Here's basically how transpiration and cohesion works. Cohesion is how all of these monkeys or water molecules, they all stick to each other just a little bit, but they're kind of sticky. Now, if the last water molecule, the one at the very, very, very top, is about to evaporate, it pulls on the one after it, which pulls on the one after it, which pulls on the one after it. And it's basically the exact same principle through which when you guys drink through a straw, when you're sucking things up through the straw, you're really sucking up the first 5 or 10 or 15 molecules, right? But the rest of them get pulled with it. One more analogy. My daughter is in preschool. And when they have to go like on a field trip, sometimes they make the little kids hold hands, or they hold like a rope so they don't get lost, right? Well, that same sort of analogy works with the water in the xylem. The first one pulls the second one, which pulls the third one, which pulls the fourth one, and they kind of all go in a row. That's basically the idea. It's the polar nature of water molecules that causes them to stick to each other. But there's one more property I need you guys to know, and it's called adhesion. Adhesion is the ability of water to not just stick to itself, but stick to other substances. Okay? Anybody ever seen like a droplets of water sticking to like the side of a glass or a water bottle? Like you've got a water bottle right here. Is there any water droplets kind of sticking to the side? Yeah, I can actually see a little bit of water just kind of hanging there, sticking to the side. That's called adhesion. So here's why this matters. Let's say the stomata close, and no longer is that chain of monkeys of water droplets keep getting pulled up the straws, and it's hunkering down. Why doesn't the water just fall all the way back down to the bottom? Due to adhesion. Those water particles actually stick to the sides of the container. So due to this polar sticky part of water, the word I need you guys to know is up here. It's called transpirational pull. When you have so much water in the plant, water can rush in and cause those two guard cells to open up. Well, as soon as those cells open up, yes, it lets air in and out, but it also allows a little bit of water to evaporate, just a little bit. But we can afford to have a little bit of water evaporate. There's lots now, right? Because we just watered the plant, right? And so as the first molecule evaporates and leaves, the second one follows, the third one follows. One more analogy. Imagine that, you guys ever heard of lemmings before? Lemmings are like these creatures where like when one of them starts walking, all the rest of them, they just keep following each other. They made fun of this in Zootopia, if you ever saw that movie, where they sold all of the popsicles to the lemmings. Yeah, they just follow. As soon as one gets going, the rest follow, right? So imagine that all of a sudden one lemming leaves, well, the next one follows, the next one follows, the next one follows, right? That's transpirational pull. One water molecule evaporates, and it pulls the next one up, pulls the next one up, pulls the next one up. That is how water goes up a plant. Because normally it shouldn't. Water would normally fall back down due to gravity. Okay? That's what this picture here basically describes. So I'm going to try to explain this bit right here. Water is going to get absorbed into cells due to active transport. First, what happens is it's usually potassium, but it can be other ions. Active transport causes potassium to go inside of the cells. Well, now the cells are in a hypotonic solution because now there's less potassium outside of the cell and more inside of the cell. And that causes osmosis to cause water to rush in. Now you got water down here. Water is in the bottom. But how in the world is water going to get from the roots all the way up? Well, through transpirational pull. As soon as you have enough water that the plant recognizes, hey guys, we got lots of water here, we can afford to lose some, right? A few water molecules evaporate. How do they evaporate? Through the stomata, the holes through which carbon dioxide is supposed to go through anyways. So a little bit of water evaporates. Now this is a bit of a lie. Does it actually go through the top of the leaf? Why can't it go through the top of the leaf? What's in the top of the leaf? The cuticle, yeah. So this picture's a bit of a lie. It actually goes out the bottom of the leaf, but really the same idea. And as soon as this guy pulls, 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 and that's how you get water all the way up to the top. So I'm almost done. I'm getting close to the end, so thank you for bearing with me. I told you this was going to be a really long day. That's what I've got going on in these last slides here. I want to talk about xylem and phloem again there, right? So water goes up these xylem. And not only that, but these xylem, because they're dead cells, they actually have a whole bunch of holes in them. They have all these little pinprick holes in the sides of the cell. Now, if you're sucking the water up like a big straw, you can keep pulling it all the way up. But sometimes that's to take an off-ramp, right? Sometimes the water needs to kind of come out these little sides as well. Sometimes it doesn't need to. But like these are off-ramps, right? Because all of the plant needs water, not just the top. Does that make sense? So the last thing we want to discuss then is phloem. So assuming that we've sucked water all the way up the plant through the process of transpiration, now we want to know, how does sugar drop back down? How does sugar get out of there, right? Water gets up to the top. How does the sugar leave? Okay. And so the mechanism is pretty critical because you have to manufacture sugar, but then you have to get it to its source. The word we use is called the sink. Not the kitchen sink, okay? But like a place where you can sink a whole bunch of glucose into. Typically, we're talking like a strawberry, right? Or an apple, right? If it's a fruit-bearing plant, right? There's got to be a place inside the plant where sugar accumulates, okay? So here's how this works. I'm going to read off my slide here. At the leaf, which is the source, phloem becomes loaded as the companion cells use carrier proteins and active transport to take in sugar molecules. So these cells right here, this companion cell basically uses active transport and says, sugar, get inside there. And so sugar goes inside this cell right here, the sieve tube cell. So it's become loaded. But it's the exact same principle we've discussed before. As soon as all the sugar goes inside of here, this is now in a hypotonic solution. Why is it hypotonic? Well, because now there's now less sugar outside. And so all of the water molecules that are also floating around, well, they're naturally going to want to follow. So as soon as you force the sugar inside, the water naturally tries to dilute it, right? That hypotonic solution. So water moves into the cells by osmosis, and it's now inside the sieve cells. And now there becomes pressure, right? Basically what happens is more and more and more water gets into these cells, and it creates like a backlog, right? And all of a sudden, it starts to push and push and push, and it pushes the water and sugar throughout the rest of the plant. So technically, xylem carries just water. Phloem actually carries water and sugar, and the water is like the transporting fluid that pushes the sugar, if that makes sense. So that pushes the phloem to the rest of the plant. So that's what I was discussing here then. Pressure builds, and the water is forced through like a hose, and it needs to find a place to escape. And eventually it finds, like I said, a sink. The sink is the place where finally all of the sugar eventually accumulates as it just keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed by all that water. The theory is called the pressure flow theory, right? There's so much pressure, it causes the sugar to flow out of the way. And usually it makes like some sort of fruit, or it goes back to the roots, or a tube. You guys know what a tuber is? A vegetable, right? So imagine that this is like a carrot or a potato or something like that, right? And then all of those sugars, they have to get pushed right back down to the roots so they can grow the vegetable underground, right? And then it probably turns into a complex carbohydrate or sugar of some kind. So anyways, this is the line I really need you guys to know. How do you get these pressure differences? Active transport and then osmosis. Let me give you one final analogy, and I think I'm done with analogies. Okay. In this scenario here, imagine that there's a party, okay? And at the party, you want to try to get people to come to your party, but no one's showing up. So what you do is you call up a couple of friends, maybe a couple of the, I don't know, hopefully this isn't like I'm not meaning this to be a mean analogy, but hopefully it's one you get. You call up a couple of popular kids in school, right? And so here's your house. And no one showed up to your party yet, and so you offer free food. Let's say food, not something else, right? Pizza. And you call up a few friends and you say, hey, I got pizza. Come over to my party. And so all of a sudden, now a few of the popular kids, or whoever you've got going, like the people who are the social outgoing people, right? You get them to your party, right? Well, all of a sudden, they post on Snapchat. We still using Snapchat, or is that done? I don't know. They post on Snapchat, hey, there's a really good party going on, right? And people out here, they hear about it, and they go, oh, I didn't know there was a party here. And they start coming, and they start coming, and they start coming, right? And what you had to do is you had to get a few people started who were, maybe I shouldn't use the word popular. Can I use the word influential? Or like, I don't know, they have 1,000 Instagram followers, and that got it started. But really, what really got it started? You called them up and offered free pizza to kind of get the scenario going. That's the active transport. You get potassium to go inside of cells first, and as soon as the potassium goes inside of the cells, then naturally water will follow it. Was that analogy? That was not the greatest analogy I've ever had, but did it make sense at least? Works, right? That is the key to how plants work, okay? Really two things. There's either transpirational pull, where water sticks to itself, and if you pull on one, well, there comes the next one. There comes the next one, there comes the next one. Okay, I have one more bad analogy, actually. You know those magicians who have like scarves hidden up their sleeves? And you pull on the first scarf, and then there's a second scarf and a third scarf. That's transpirational pull, right? That's one way in which water moves in a plant. The second way is the pressure theory. First you get potassium in, water follows it. Enough water follows, it starts to push and push and push. Okay? And that's my final slide here. So what goes on in xylem? Xylem is mostly transpirational pull. On the way up, this molecule moves, which forces this one up, 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 and they all basically get sucked up like one big straw. On this one right here in phloem, you have sugar and water. So you've got these sugar molecules here, and you have these water molecules here. Active transport gets the sugar into the cell. Well, now you have a hypotonic solution, a hypertonic cell, water follows it, and so much water follows that it starts to force it. And there's pressure built up. Oh my goodness, that was a long lesson. Thank you. Can you guys think of any questions you may have right now? Okay, so let me do a quick recap and then we'll take off because I've got a few minutes and I want to let you go early because you guys were awesome. Hopefully what we've discussed today then is a whole bunch of different tissues, systems, organs, and cells. Hopefully you can name some of each. As well, hopefully now you'll know how things move inside of plants. The main things that we need to have move inside of plants are the following: light, carbon dioxide, water, oxygen, and sugar. Those are the main 5 things. And each part of the plant has been designed very specifically so that those things can move. The cuticle lets light through. The spongy tissue lets air and carbon dioxide through. The xylem and phloem let water through. Right? Okay. So here's where I want you guys to finish now. Tomorrow we're going to do a quick activity where we're going to test cell membranes. It's honestly going to take 5 minutes. We actually leave it overnight because it takes a long time to occur. So it's kind of like I set it up. We just let it sit there for a while. So tomorrow's more or less a work day. Can I ask that at the end of tomorrow, you guys more or less finish up your activity, your assignment, and now start to think about this project where what I'm really asking you to do in the project here is make a PowerPoint where you talk about all the different parts of what I mentioned today. Find lots of pictures online, and this will hopefully help consolidate your learning, right? So going back here, talk about roots, talk about palisade tissue, talk about stomata, talk about vascular tissue, right? And make a PowerPoint on it. Everybody good? All right, thanks so much, guys. You can take off early. That was like 65 minutes of me talking.